Welcome to Miniature Steam Hacks, Hints and Tips. This is part 2, fitting and testing a live steam injector. I recently fitted this injector to a locomotive. It's very important that the driver can see the injector, because if water is coming out of this overflow, then it's not going into the boiler. Here's a clip of the injector installation filmed from underneath but from the other side, and you can see how neat these pipes are. The bends are very tight, but they're also very smooth. There's no kinking of the copper whatsoever. Any kinks in the pipe or restricted piping in the way from the injector to the clack valve can have an adverse effect on the way the injector operates, and in some cases, if the piping is not done correctly, the injector won't work at all. In a badly piped injector installation, including leaky unions, they're also to blame if they let air in at the wrong place. All that will happen is that the water will continuously be running from the overflow, and as you turn on the injector steam valve, all that will happen is a lot more water will start to gush out of the overflow. As you slowly start to close the water valve, which is the normal way to make the injector pick up, that's the term used for an injector working, all that comes out of the injector overflow is a load of steam, often accompanied by a load of water. And if this is the state of affairs, then I'm sorry, the injector is not injecting any water into the boiler. When using these live steam injectors, which are amazingly reliable, not only must the piping be made properly, it needs to go directly to the clack if at all possible, so the moving column of water can go straight into the boiler. And now, with the help of my friend Phil from Blackgates Engineering, it's time for the steam test, and the first thing to do, of course, is pump some water into the boiler. On this engine, the arrangement is there is a hand pump in one of the side tanks. And I'm using the hand pump to pump some water into the boiler initially because we need some water in there before we can put a fire in the firebox. Having side tanks or a pannier tank is a great idea because the water is near the boiler and the radiated heat from the boiler warms up the water. And this is a good thing because warm water will require less heat to turn it into steam. So the water for the axle pump, that's the pump that's connected to the axle that works only when the engine is running, and the water for the hand pump, which you have to move manually, is always drawn from the side tanks because the water is pre-warmed. As a live steam injector will not work with warm water, we need a cold water supply from a separate tank, and here it is. This is a small commercial water tank designed to supply lathe coolant to a small lathe. So I mounted this plastic tank on a roughly put together piece of wood, and I ran a pipe from the plastic tank to a model valve to regulate the flow of the water. For this steam test, we didn't run the engine on coal. This is a coal-fired locomotive. Instead, we used the gas blowtorch in the firebox underneath, held in place by a substantial bracket to prevent the blowtorch from moving away from the firebox and burning the underside of the engine. We purposely turned down the pressure of the blowtorch to bring the boiler up to temperature slowly, because it's never a good idea to force a boiler. Even with the blowtorch turned down, steam was raised fairly quickly. And as you can see, there's 50 pounds per square inch showing on the gauge. With everything in position, it's now time to test the injector. The first thing you do is open the water valve. The injector needs to be cool. Let the water run, then open the steam valve. The water runs a lot faster, like you can see here. And as you very gently start to close the water valve, the injector picks up. The overflow stops running, and it's now pumping water into the boiler. Here it is in real time. Safety valve just about to blow. Water valve opened to cool the injector. Steam valve opened. Injector is injecting water into the boiler. I'll put this one down to beginner's luck. I opened the water valve precisely the right amount, so as soon as I turned on the steam valve, the injector immediately picked up. I turned up the gain on the camera's microphone so you can hear the sound that the injector should make when it's working properly. What's the PSI?
About 30.
Opening water valve. Let the water run to cool the injector. Opening steam valve. The injector is injecting, so you should see the gauge glass water level rise. As you can see here, I'm using a kettle to refill the water tank, but this is cold water. Injectors will not work with warm or hot water. That's why it's always a good idea to have an external injector tank, because the side tanks on an engine will get too warm to allow the injector to operate properly. For the purpose of the steam test, we were firing the engine using a blowtorch underneath instead of coal. And most of the time in this test, when we're injecting, we turn the gas torch off so you can hear the sound that the injector makes. And the reason that Phil keeps touching the water valve is because there's no fire in the boiler now. As the pressure drops, you have to just knock the water down a little bit to keep the injector pumping.
40, 30, it's about 25. About 25.
According to the pressure gauge fitted to the engine, the range of this injector is from 100 pounds per square inch when the safety valve blows, down to about 25 pounds per square inch. The problem with this injector, it's working too well now. It's putting water into the boiler at a very good rate. If we forget to knock it off, then what's happening is it's just overfilling the boiler, and then obviously it won't fill it any further. So all we're doing is just blowing down the boiler to allow us to put some more water in the boiler. Mr. Don English of Jubilee Fittings is an old friend of mine, and recently Phil and I were talking to Don at Blackgates Engineering. We were discussing the capabilities and performance of his injectors, and I was mentioning the fact that a lot of people seem to think that live steam injectors will pull up the water if the tank is lower than the injector. So with the help of my small water tank and my lovely assistant Phil, we thought we'd put this to the test. Starting off with the tank in the normal position and made it so that the injector was pumping water into the boiler. Then Phil moved the tank.
There it's lifting about 12 inches.
This is the end of the test, and we're finally blowing down the boiler to empty it. The injector now works perfectly as it should. This engine is now fitted with a number 3 injector, and I forgot to mention, it works every time. I really do like this engine. I could do some wonderful things with it. I'd like to buy one. That's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful.